Hey everyone, Alvaro Cortez Jr. here, aka Lance Danger, and welcome back to the Danger Zone. I just wanted to take a little bit to talk about an iconic moment in comic book history. Today marks the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman, and that was a comic that really changed my perspective on a lot of things when it first came out. When it came out in 1992, I had just moved to Puerto Rico with my mother and my sister. We had been living there for like maybe a year already, and I had just started getting into superhero comics for this first time after spending my youth reading Archie comics and stuff like that. So essentially, after the Batman 1989 movie, I was getting more and more interested in more teen comic books, and already I was starting to become a teenager myself. So I guess it was like that natural progression. So there were comics available back then in pharmacies and supermarkets as well. So they were pretty accessible at the time when I was a little kid in Puerto Rico in that sense. But of course, when it actually made the news that Superman was announced that he was going to die in Superman number 75, those Superman issues got really scarce, and I really didn't get to buy those issues leading up and throughout the whole Death of Superman storyline. It wasn't until like late 1993, probably early 1994, that my sister, my mom, and myself went to Plaza Las Americas, which is the biggest mall in Puerto Rico. We didn't go there often, especially together, because we didn't have a car back then. And in Puerto Rico, you kind of do need a car to move around. Like, public transportation isn't that great. So it would take us anywhere up to an hour and a half to 2 hours to get from our home to that mall in San Juan. So it would be like an all day affair. We would have to leave early, walk around the mall, eat and whatnot, and then come back relatively early before the public transportation shuts down after a certain after a certain time slot. So we went there, we got there, we walked around the mall a little bit, and we happened to go into the small comic book shop that was there called Blanco y Negro, translated into English as Black and White. And it was a very small store. It was almost like a kiosk in the middle of the store. I remember I actually saw that store on the news when issue 75 came out, and you can imagine how massive that was back then. There were people lined up for blocks outside of the mall waiting for it to open just to go into this small little corner of that hallway and where that comic shop was. So this must have been like late 93 or early 94. And I was just browsing around, and I actually saw a trade paperback of The Death of Superman. And I really wasn't aware that trade paperbacks were a thing. So I actually double checked with the employee if that actually was like the whole storyline leading up to and the final fight between Doomsday and Superman. And of course, I bought it when he confirmed it. So it was a really interesting time because by that time, Nightfall was about to end, I think, as well. So it was. I was just getting into superhero comics when Superman got killed and Batman was just about to be replaced by a psychopath named John Paul Valley, also known as Azrael. So it was interesting times. It was an interesting time to get into comic books. So I read it cover to cover. I must have read that trade paperback a million times. It had such great talents. You know, on the art side, you of course you had Dan Jurgens, Tom Grummett, John Bogdanove, Stuart Immelman, and then on the writing side, you had uh, Dan Jurgens again, Louise Simonson, Roger Stern, Carl Kessel. It was just a great who's who of writers and artists of the time, and they told a really great story, at least in my opinion. And it wasn't until my best friend and I actually watched the Death and Return of Superman, the animated movie, that in the featurette that it had as a bonus in the DVDs, that they were explaining the process of how they did the Death of Superman in the comics, and the each issue there were fewer and fewer panels up until issue 75, where it was just a splash page fest. And that was mind blowing because it almost feels like it was all just like one big countdown from one issue to another until you reached the climax, even using the panels. I thought that was so genius. And it really did change the landscape for better or worse for comics, because afterwards it was like event comic after event comic, not just for Superman but for other titles as well. As far as I'm aware, the whole Nightfall thing was just a coincidence that it just happened to go off at more or less around the same time. So it was interesting times indeed. I certainly enjoyed it. There was a lot of backlash because of the level of violence in the comic. Since I grew up watching horror movies, I was already used to extreme violence. So if anything, as a kid, I was thinking, I don't know what was the big deal. It's not violent enough for me. But I digress. It was just such a great comic to read, and even now it still kind of holds up to an extent. I haven't read the whole thing completely as an adult, but I'll flip through it every now and again, and it just brings back a lot of fond memories. And if anyone that's read The Death of Superman, you can definitely leave your comments as well, what you thought about it, what kind of impact it may have had for you, or if you're just discovering it for the first time, you can leave your perspective as well. It would be cool to just kind of read other opinions on the matter. To me, it's a timeless classic of comics. It definitely has its flaws, but I think those flaws is what makes it even more charming, because it's kind of like a time capsule of what the industry and the world was like in that early 90s. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I will definitely be making more short videos like these in the future, talking about comics that's either had a big impact when I was reading it or that's inspired me to make comics as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all stay well and safe.